Did you know that Intel is bad? Because that's the crux of today's video. I'm just going to be making fun of how bad Intel is in 2020 and also how the M1 chip can run Windows, believe it or not. So yes, very interesting information. Let's delve into everything. So without further ado, make sure to like and subscribe. Click that bell notification. And with that being said, let's just tuck in. So it's fair to say that Intel has taken many L's this year from the likes of AMD and namely Apple. Because if you didn't know, for some reason, Apple introduced their first silicon chip, the first of its kind, the entry-level M1 chip, and it's blown away every single Intel chip out there, including the i9 16-inch MacBook Pro. So it's fair to say Intel is just embracing how bad they are at this point. In fact, the motto of the company seems to be, hey, we make terrible chips. Please buy our chips, I beg you. I will give you a good discount. Please buy them. They're only slightly worse. Okay, I lied to you. They are very much worse, but please buy them. I beg you. So yes, it's fair to say they are in a pretty desperate situation now, and it's got to a point where they even redesigned their logo in the hopes of reimagining and recreating their brand and getting rid of all the stigma against the brand. But no, everybody still remembers that Intel chips are just terrible. But thankfully, it does seem someone has finally woken up at Intel and has given us a brand new range of chips called the 11th gen Tiger Lake processors. And apparently, they're going to be destroying the M1. And guess what, people? I can't believe I'm saying this, but they've only gone and done it. This new Intel chip is faster than the M1 chip. In fact, it destroys it, and Intel is back at the top of the food chain where they belong. Well done, Intel. At least that's what I would have said if they hadn't gone ahead and just, you know, screwed everything up. And yes, they've made another bad chip. Okay, let's just cut to the chase. The chips are bad again, and yeah, it just seems like Intel will never recover from this. They're just getting worse and worse. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So in terms of the specific numbers, if you want to see how bad these new Intel chips are compared to the M1 chip, the highest end Tiger Lake chip was benchmarked. It was in a Dell XPS 13, and it got a single core score of 1,544 and a multi-core score of 5,491. Of course, that is just a bunch of numbers, but when you compare it to the M1 chip, you start to see just how bad it is. So for comparison, we have the MacBook Air with the M1 chip, the lowest end MacBook available with 8GB of RAM compared to 32GB in the Dell XPS that I mentioned before. And the Geekbench scores are the following. You have 1,713 with single core and a multi-core score of 7,484. And yes, you can see that blows away the Intel chip. In fact, it boggles my mind just how far Intel still is from Apple Silicon. I mean, those multi-score numbers are insane. There is a huge, massive gap between the highest end Tiger Lake chip and the lowest end Apple Silicon chip. So bear that in mind. This is going to be the worst Apple Silicon chip Apple's ever made, and it still easily beats Intel's latest offering. That is just amazing, and also I kind of feel bad for Intel because they just keep taking L's. Like, it's kind of just pathetic at this point. Now, in terms of the nitty-gritty info, the base frequency of the M1 chip is 3.2 GHz compared to the Tiger Lake chip, which has a base frequency of 3 GHz. And of course, the M1 is built upon a 5nm process compared to the Tiger Lake, which still uses the archaic 10nm process. So yes, the M1 chip is going to be 100% more efficient. Another interesting thing to note is the M1 has the advantage of having 8 cores, which is twice the number of cores the 11th gen i7 processor has. So again, you can see the M1 is light years ahead of Intel's latest offering. And yeah, it just seems like Intel really isn't trying anymore. They're just going to keep giving us these incremental upgrades, which are still very, very behind Apple and AMD's offerings. Now, of course, as much as I would love to, I can't just keep slagging off Intel, so I do have to mention a few things to note about these benchmarks. And the main and really only point I want to get across to you guys is that Apple has the advantage of both optimizing the hardware and the software. They make both of these core components of a computer, and so they can churn out as much performance as they can with these laptops, whereas, of course, Intel has to rely on other manufacturers, and of course, Intel chips being in Dell hardware is not going to be as optimized as, of course, Apple silicon in an Apple computer. And of course, that also applies to the software because Intel does not make the software for most PCs. That's Microsoft, that's Windows, that's completely different. Whereas of course, Apple can control macOS. They can make macOS work brilliantly on Apple Silicon because again, they have the advantage of making pretty much everything when it comes to their computers. They make the hardware, they make the chips now, and they make the software. So yeah, I don't really see Intel ever beating Apple because of that, and I guess they'll just have to accept it. Hopefully they do catch up with AMD though, because right now it's not looking too good for them. But this also begs the question, why is Apple even considering working on more Intel Macs when this is the case? Because if you remember, a while back I made a video on Apple possibly giving us two versions of the redesigned MacBook Pros that are launching next year, one with Intel and one with Apple Silicon, which, by the way, if you want more info on that, check out the video in the iCard above. But anyways, coming back to my question, I mentioned in that video that if Intel is going to be using their terrible chips, there's going to be a huge disparity in performance between these two models, and when they're at the same price, it really doesn't make a lot of sense for the consumer to even consider the Intel machine over the Apple Silicon machine. And of course, now we've delved into the raw numbers, we can still see that it doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would Apple offer an Intel version of their MacBook Pro when the Apple Silicon version is far superior? One very popular answer to that question is, of course, Windows. They need Windows on their Macs, and of course, right now, Apple Silicon can't run Windows, right? Well, no. Actually, they can. So all this time, we've kind of been under the assumption that Apple Silicon can't work with Windows, and so you're kind of stuck to using the Intel machines if you need Windows via Boot Camp. But in a recent interview with the lovely man himself, Craig, he has told us that Apple Silicon can run Windows, and it's up to Microsoft to bring Windows to Apple Silicon. But thankfully, we don't have to wait till Microsoft takes their sweet time bringing Windows to the ARM Mac, because guess what? Some very clever developer has managed to bring a virtualized version of Windows 10 ARM that of course is available on the Surface Pro X to the M1 Mac. And of course, with virtualized software, you expect it to be a sluggish mess, but no, because the M1 chip is so overpowered, it's not crippled by the virtualized software in any way, and in fact, it's still better than the Surface Pro X. So the M1 Mac is still faster running a virtualized version of Windows compared to the Surface running a native version of Windows. I mean, that just illustrates how brilliant Apple Silicon is. And so this pretty much shows you how, yes, there are some workarounds to bring Windows on ARM Macs, and also, no, there isn't a huge effect in terms of performance. So it's a win-win situation here, and Apple, if you're watching, don't make any more Intel Macs because of this reason. We don't want to see Tiger Lake chips in these amazing redesigned MacBook Pros, so please, Timothy, I beg you, don't do this. This will be a bad idea. Just stop now. But tell me in the comments below, do you think Intel has a chance of destroying the competition and bouncing back? I'm kidding. That's not really my question, because I know the answer to that question. They will never bounce back. My real question is, if you do use Windows on your Mac, why do you use it? That's really my question, because honestly, I've never really wanted to have Windows on my Mac, so I am very curious as to why you guys use it. So yes, let me know in the comments below. And on that note, I'm going to end it here. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, click that bell notification, and with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya, peeps.